So I'm going to keep my time minimum because this is the expert over here. But I think I'm a producer on the side as well, and my institutional scale is a little bit smaller, but it's a similar relationship. I do a lot of selling to restaurants. So a lot of the discussion that happened at the panel the last session was really familiar to me with some slight differences and tweaks to the way that works out. But what I've discovered for me is that it's not about the price point. It's not about the familiarity of the product. It's really about figuring out my partner's systems and knowing what I need to do to be able to communicate effectively with them, and to be able to figure out what the diversity of needs are in any kind of partnership around getting our product to them and having it happen on a consistent basis. That's going to be, especially for organizations that are in transition and that are trying things maybe for the first time, familiar enough that it's worth making that risk and it's worth taking those steps, and that there's a level of certainty through that familiarity available, and that I'm keeping track of all of that, and I'm thinking about meeting those needs in a way that I can be really thoughtful about whether it makes business sense for me as well. I think that's one of we're all very excited about getting food into schools. We need to be thinking about getting food into schools in a way that's going to work for a farmer's bottom line. Because if they can't stay in business doing business with schools, then there's a big issue there. So thinking about developing strategies and systems and being very strategic and establishing those partnerships that there is mutual benefit and that there is an economy of that process. And I think when we get to some Q&A, there are lots of things that I could talk about, but I want to pass the mic on to Tricia right now, who's going to talk through some very specific tools and resources that are available to growers, but that really matter for everybody involved in this conversation. Have the opportunity to discuss that and then see what else is on y'all's minds. Tricia?
Thanks. So I do have to change my slides here, so I'm going to stand a little bit in the dark, but sorry about that. So yeah, I'm Tricia from the Washington State Department of Agriculture. I've been working on farm to school in the State Department of Agriculture since late 2008, trying to support farm to school around the state, both on the farm side and the school side and the community side, trying to meet the questions that come to us from all different sectors. And I'll say I feel really, really fortunate to have the opportunity to work in all of those sectors, because each of those groups is full of stories and fun, and I get to go to the school conference, the food conferences, and the farm conferences, and it's really great. So hopefully if we have questions that cross the line to other sectors, we have a lot of people in the room who do those different kinds of work, but also I hopefully have gathered stories from them that I can share to answer some questions. I'm going to talk about farm to school today. I want to acknowledge another project that I have, and we'll go into it a little bit, which is called Bridging the Gaps. And it does come up in farm to school. We'll talk about good agricultural practices, as potential certifications, and then what is up with the new produce safety rules. So we'll have a little session on that, assuming that that is of interest to people. We can also put that off for another day if we decide to. So the first thing I want to do is just give a little bit of history of school food, in case you don't realize that school food and agriculture originated as in partnership. Originally there was concern in 1946 is when the National School Lunch Program started. There was concern that our men at that time were not fit for service because they were undernourished. And the solution was that we could feed them in schools, but also that there was a need for outlet for agricultural products, and the schools were a great place for that. They were critical to successful learning and student success, physically and mentally and academically. In 2010, some of these slides were put together a couple of years ago, and I didn't have time to update the numbers, but they're not changing that much. Over 31 million children receive school lunch every day. In Washington, these are some of the numbers. I'm not going to read them all, but we have the number of districts in the National School Lunch Program seems to fluctuate somewhat, but we have at least 280 of them, and we serve a lot of lunches in Washington every day. And then the cost breakdown, so you may have heard how much a lunch costs and how much schools get money back for it. I just want to point out very briefly the amount of money that schools get, and this is the larger budget, but you can see the division of what goes to supplies, what goes to food, and what goes to labor. So that dollar figure that schools get for a reimbursable lunch is not just for food. They have to do a lot with that money. And here's the breakdown per meal, and again, this has probably changed a little bit. I know there was a little bit added with the new meal pattern just this year, but anyone who wants can add what the numbers are right now if you want, if there's someone in the room who has that on the tip of their tongue. But generally, you can see that it's small. And there is a long road from what people think of as school lunches, and I will say that most school lunches have already gone well beyond this picture over here, and are well on their way to being farm-to-school lunches or healthier lunches. And just implementing the new standards this year means that a lot of schools are serving very healthy food. This is a very quick, oh my gosh, look at all the things that have to happen and related to school, to farm-to-school. There are food safety considerations and seasonal availability. We heard Justin talk about the season for growing a lot of the foods, especially down in this area, is different than the school schedule, and how do you align those two? What are the volumes that are needed for any individual school district? Delivery times and methods. Product consistency is a concern for schools. There is a competitive bid process, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the sort of new update on information about how schools are buying food from farms. Their kitchen facilities may need to be updated or put back into use. Student acceptance, we've heard a lot about students' acceptance today of new foods, the cost, liability concerns. It's a big picture and a lot of pieces to put together. And there are a lot of great people in the state and nationally working on all of these topics. Washington State has some really stellar farm-to-school stories, and this is we just did a survey. The reports haven't come out yet, but we asked school districts around the state when they started doing farm-to-school activities, if they were, and we do not define farm-to-school activities as any specific thing. And you see that some people have been doing it for a while. It started a while back. And then 2004, 2005, it sort of started, and it's just really exploded in the last few years, the number of schools that are doing farm to school as they define it. And that includes buying foods, changing different foods in their menus, providing educational and outreach activities, school gardens. All of those together are farm to school. And we didn't break it out for this question, although we did ask them in another part of the survey what they were doing, and it really runs the whole gamut. Those are apricots from Tonemaker Farm that went to Kent School District last year. In that same survey, we asked why people do it. Why do people do farm to school? And these are the answers we got. Schools value supporting their local economy and having really great relationships in their communities. They want the high quality produce that we've heard about today and that we're eating today. And then they also wanted to increase consumption of fresh fruits and vegetables, and they feel like farm to school is a way to do that. I'm extrapolating here from what else I've heard, but a lot of that is that there's a story, that there's a person, that there's someone in their community who grew that food that they can talk to and understand. And that really increases their willingness. We heard this morning, if you grow it, you'll eat it. If you know the person who grew it, that also helps. And then on the farm side, we heard a range of answers, and the top one was positively impacting student health and nutrition. Raising public awareness about food and farming in our state. We have a very large and diverse farming sector. Strengthening community relations and increasing their volumes of sales within a shorter delivery distance. So we're going to talk a little bit about how it's done, partly to introduce some topics, and like Brian said, we're going to have a discussion here with lots of time for Q&A, where we can answer questions and you all can answer each other's questions. So in that same survey, nearly 70% of Washington school districts wanted to know about product availability. That was one of their biggest questions and concerns, is how do I know what's out there and when it's available and how I can get it? So our job as farmers, as other people working in communities, is to make sure that schools have the tools they need to know what's there, what might work in their menu at what time of year, and how to use it, all of those things that will help them decide that working with their local farms is an option that they can accomplish and succeed with. So here's the bottom line on the whole procurement question, what do they have to do and what do you have to do to buy and sell food. USDA has recently put out the geographic preference option rules a couple of years ago now, actually. And there was a lot of confusion about how it works with how they've been buying food and what about all these great relationships I already have with my neighborhood farms. We've spent, with the Sustainable Food and Farming Network and some grant funds, a lot of time working with lawyers and experts at WSDA, at USDA, to figure out what this means on the ground. And the good news is, it's absolutely doable. And there is a little bit of a process. You'll hear different words like you heard on the stage today, the competitive bids and the procurement and all these things about how they're buying food. The bottom line is USDA, our state law has said that under 40,000 you don't have to have a competitive process to buy things, schools, so it's across the board, it's food and everything. But we learned in exploring about procurement of local foods that USDA actually doesn't have such a bottom threshold where you don't have to have competitive pricing. At USDA, all food purchases, and we're using USDA dollars for the National School Lunch Program, all purchases have to have a competitive process based on price. You can preference local food, you can choose which vendors if you're doing it informal, but you are supposed to, and this is the easiest way, if the purchases are for Washington grown food and they're under $150,000, then schools, it's an informal procurement if it's under $150,000 and it's Washington grown. But they at least have to say, here's what I want, and the form I want it in, and when I need it, and get 3 people to give them prices. Or more, it can be more. And they can do that as simply as going to a farmer's market with 3 pieces of paper that say, I need these products, what would it cost to buy it from you? Or they can do it by sending out a letter at the beginning of the school year or having a farm meeting with all the farmers they already work with and letting them know what they're going to need during the year and asking people to provide quotes either at that time and committing for the purchases over the time, or they can do it by saying, we want you all to send us fresh sheets every week and we're going to use those as quotes. So I need to be able to see that there are 3 sources of red peppers, and then I'll compare those prices and buy from those, and it can happen weekly if they wanted to. This informal procurement can happen multiple times a year. You can do it seasonally, you can do it for Taste Washington Day specific. So those are kind of the examples that I like to share for how it is possible, and as just an example of what it can look like or should look like for schools to be buying directly from farms. And all of that comes down to USDA's standard for using federal lunch dollars is that it needs to be used wisely and making sure that you're getting a good price for the product you're buying. So they also have a geographic preference option related to this, and I will get through this pretty quickly and we'll move on to discussion. But just so you know what the schools are hearing about right now, the federal rule out of the last Farm Bill had a geographic preference option that schools can apply an advantage to businesses that can provide local product. The schools define what local is, and they can do that however they wish. And I'm just going to give you a little quick caveat without going into a bunch of details, that our Washington State exemption from that other procurement process is for Washington grown food. We can have a bigger discussion about that. Anybody individually can have that discussion with me, or we can have it later here. But essentially that means schools are looking for Washington grown food grown within Washington or a smaller area, and not across borders in other states, if they're applying a formal geographic preference option. There's a list of what foods are retaining their inherent agricultural character. That just means not overly processed. And this is their list of what process means. It includes frozen ground beef patties, for instance, because they're not undergoing a heating process or a other kind of cooking process or canning or something like that. The other rules are that they can't require local food if they're doing, for instance, this is if they're doing a big produce contract. They can't say, I will only buy from vendors who can provide Washington grown food. They can say, I'm giving a specific point process or price preference or some other way of providing an advantage to vendors who can provide Washington-grown food. That it can't be we will only buy Washington-grown food and we'll pay as much as that takes. And the fourth rule is that it's about the product, not the vendor. So it's not I will only buy from Washington farmers, it's I will only buy from farmers or other vendors who can provide Washington-grown food, and I'll provide that advantage for that food. So, is all of that basically clear? Does anybody have any questions now and want to talk about that a little bit more? It's kind of to give you a background on what the schools are learning and what process they're going to use. Part of what that might mean for farmers is that you'll get maybe a letter inviting you to send your fresh sheets. You may instead get a request for quotes that has a list of products they want for Taste Washington Day or for fall season, and asking for quotes on those food items. They may also be attaching a food safety checklist or a delivery schedule that they want you to agree to or add your own details to.
This might not be the right time, but I'll just bring it up. So the procurement then, like if you're just a school district that's just trying to get in the door with some local growers, but they're not ready, they don't have the capacity yet, but it may be a good partnership. Can the school have the power to say we want to procure foods in the following growing season?
So yes, you can have any of the discussions and planning periods you want. You cannot really commit to it unless you've gotten quotes for that next season and are saying, yeah, we know that you're going to be able to offer us the price we want. Let's stick to that price. And then, like someone on the stage said today, if they don't have the crop for whatever reason, climate, shift or something, then you can always order from a mainland vendor that you're buying other food from or other produce that isn't grown here. But yeah, you can have those conversations, you can plan ahead, you can even do your fall bid now so that you can be getting those commitments for the product now that you will be selling later. You can do longer seasons for things like apples that you can get fresh for most of the school year. So there's still a lot of flexibility, and most of what you've learned about farm to school will still stand, and we'll talk a lot more about. You need to give them
Are there growers who have done that sort of advanced bidding process with districts where you've gone through? And I know that oftentimes you'll sit down this time of year and say, here's what I'm looking at planting, would you be interested in this as a way of gauging interest? But as far as going through that formal bidding process, are there growers in the room who are familiar with that? And if yes, what has your experience been? No?
I don't think it's happened.
I don't think it's happened too much in most places, but it is starting to happen. This question's coming up more and more as people are trying to plan ahead. Marcy, did you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question that goes back to the list of products that the school wants that they have to put out. How exhaustive does that have to be and how much detail? And I mean, for example, say there's something really special you want from a local farm that, I don't know, purple carrots or particular heirloom brand pear. There may only be one grower that has it. How can you find three?
I'll tell you, on the USDA webinar about this, they said, what if there's only one strawberry grower in my area, what do I have to do? And they said, well, expand your area. And the group was it was a webinar, so it was quiet, but later, on discussion, I'll tell you. So, you are recommended to get at least 3 price points. You can also, we kind of can get into a lot of detail about what the language might be for the schools to put in there in terms of we reserve the right to buy from more than one vendor if price and availability require it. Things like that, so that you can end up buying some of your product on the list from this farm and some from that farm, and USDA has heard me say that and they're okay with that. Sometimes you can do a substitution clause, and sometimes you can just document. We tried as hard as we could to find the thing that we really want to highlight on our Purple Carrot Day, and this is what we found, so we're buying it. And I have heard from the auditors that as long as you're documenting what happened, that it's okay. And that means for you all, as farmers in the room, documenting, you need to send them an email or they need to document a phone conversation with you that says, I asked 4 other guys and they're not growing purple carrots. So they just need to keep the record. That's kind of on the school side. But it is possible to still buy those products if no one else has them. The follow-up from the strawberry conversation kind of clarified that, but it was really shocking at first to just be like, wait, that's what we have to do.
Do you have to get your bids, or I know it's recommended, but since like FSA is our main food source, then we can seek product from other vendors, but we get majority of our food from FSA.
Sure, right.
So we can use local farmers, and you don't have to do the bid.
You don't have to do a formal bid to do your contract with FSA or a main produce vendor, but you do have to get some quotes to make sure that when you're buying from a farm, you're getting a price that is a competitive price. Not necessarily with FSA, but among the 3 vendors you're asking that. So, yeah.
So if you wanted organic carrots, you would just get organic carrot quotes. You would just get carrot quotes.
Right, yes. You can specify, and that's what I tell the schools, you want to be pretty specific, because a lot of people have said bagged carrots, period. And we're giving them a lot more advice. There's a procurement guide on the table in the other room that we're doing a session with schools in the afternoon. If you really want to learn the details of it, you can come back to that session. We can go into a lot more of this. But yes, we're encouraging them to be more specific about the products they want, the varieties they want, the form they need it in, and grade 1 or 2 with descriptions, not just grade 1 or 2. So that the farm can then price based on, well, they don't need them to be beautiful. They need to use them, they're going to use them for something else this time. And you can price them accordingly, which helps the schools too. And the size counts, for instance, we heard that the schools need smaller apples. Sometimes that's a great deal on both sides. They can specify the size they want. And they usually do specify the size they want anyway. So you can be pretty specific and creative with specifications. We're going to skip through this. This is just the size of apples they need. If they're, if the farm is harvesting straight into boxes, there might be a variety in there, and they were communicating this is the size range that is acceptable for us. Then there are the food safety questions that they may ask. Some school districts will require a GAPS, Good Agricultural Practices certification. Others use a survey. Others visit the farms or ask. If it's a processed food, then it needs to be a licensed processor. And then just the things that they can ask about freshness and days from harvest and traceability information that helps them be able to market the products, but make sure it's also fresh. And also gives it's kind of more of an advantage to farms or businesses close by that might have a fresher product. There is some amazing variety of peppers from Tobias, who's here with us today, going to Kent School District last year. And then there are just the things to consider when you might want to approach your school, and we can talk a little more about that marketing yourself, although I suspect that a lot of you are pretty good at that based on farmers markets and other experience you might have. But there are events, we've heard a lot about Taste Washington Day, it's the last Wednesday in September. It's a partnership with Washington School Nutrition Association. We work with them to help find farmers and things that they want, and also to do lots of materials and posters and things, and the Fresh Food in Schools project provides a lot of those to their partners too. And then there's just some other examples of places you might do that. Some inspiring photos. And there's my contact information there. So that's really what I wanted to at least introduce as topics. I thought you might want to talk about what you're hearing about quotes and bids and things, and also food safety. And I have here some, I'll just pass these around. These are one-pagers about our Bridging the Gaps project to educate and inform farmers, smaller to mid-sized farmers, about the GAP standard and how you can meet it in a cost-effective way. We're also training auditors on that, and I'm making the pitch partly because we want host farms who are interested, not necessarily certified now, preferably not actually, but interested in hosting other farms and or auditors to learn about the realities on that scale of farm and talk about what would it take to meet the standard. Because my experience in discussing with folks is that there are a lot of misconceptions about how hard certain parts of it are, and also some very real questions about, well, does this count? And we have the auditors at those events to say, well, it should count, shouldn't it? Well, let's talk about that. Let's figure out how it needs to be adjusted to meet the standard, but we think it will. So I felt really encouraged by this project as people have realized that they can meet the standard, they're going to over time, or whatever it might take for them. And also then the produce safety rules, if you haven't heard, the draft rules were just released by the FDA a few weeks ago, 3 weeks ago maybe now. And that's a review period or comment period. And we at WSDA will be doing some kind of outreach with WSU and others to kind of have roundtables around the state, feedback sessions and things like that. So we really want to hear what you think about those draft rules so that we can send it to FDA, but also encourage you to directly send your comments to FDA and their website. If you just look up FDA produce safety rule, you can see some fact sheets and short versions plus ways to comment. So I'm open to conversation and question. I'll give it back to Brian.
Yes.
I have a question. Can you go back to the slides where you're talking about the different certifications or requirements that might be required by a district for a farm?
That one?
Yeah. So, what are the way you said it made me think they get to choose what certifications they're going to request, or who is telling them?
So, right. Yes, that's a really good question. Right now, until those produce safety rules go into full effect, right now there are no federal standards, including in the National School Lunch Program, for what food safety standard produce has to meet to be sold in schools, or anywhere else for that matter. And so Good Agricultural Practices is a voluntary certification that many buyers are requiring, not school buyers necessarily, although some of them are, but other distributors are starting to require it, and we're hearing just a lot that buyers are asking farmers to get this certification. There's a lot of concern about how much it costs or how many people it takes to get the paperwork done and all of those. And that's why we're doing the Bridging the Gaps project, is to try to figure out that and help people work their way through that and provide resources and online Q&A and other resources from around the country. But right now, the buyer decides. And in this case, that means the school district, usually nutrition director, in partnership with their purchasing office, will decide we're going to require certification, or we're not going to require certification because a lot of the growers you want to work with don't have that certification, so we're going to do a safety checklist. And we provide in our procurement guide and on our website examples from Portland Public Schools, University of Iowa has one. We have 2 or at least 3, maybe a few more checklists that schools can use to have that conversation with their farmers. And USDA has also put out a guide that's just the conversation to have with your produce growers about food safety.
There's no federal requirements at this point in time.
That's right. Right now there is no, you may have heard as schools the term approved source for your food. There is no such thing as an approved source for produce because there is no laws governing produce.
But there probably will be.
There will be. The produce safety rules are the result of the Food Safety Modernization Act you may have heard about. And they will have requirements for all farms, and there's also a processor version of it, that sell their product. There are some exemptions based on volume and price, dollar values of sales. And those, we are still working our way through that. Each one of them is a 600-page binder, the processing one and the farm one. So we at the agency are working our way through. People nationally are working their way through. And there are fact sheets and more information being clear about what those exemptions will look like. I don't think schools will be one. Food sold directly to consumers is where those exemptions lie.
Yeah, I don't know. There was, when the Food Safety Modernization Act passed in, I think it's in 2010, there was an exemption. Senator Tester from Montana was a really strong advocate that there needed to be exemptions for smaller scale farms that sold directly to consumers or sold directly to schools or restaurants. So that exemption got into the law. The concern we have now is that the proposed regulations actually honor that exemption. And so I work with a group called the National Sustainable Ag Coalition in Washington, D.C., and they are going through these 1,200 pages of regulations to make sure that those exemptions that we work so hard to get are actually being honored. So I just wanted to give you that caveat. I know that Tricia's boss is also going through those 1,200 pages. So, but I know that they would love to hear, from farmers. I'm not sure a lot of you really have the desire to go through 1,200 pages of regulations, but if you do, we would love to have your feedback.
Yeah, and there are also fact sheets that kind of give probably the things that will most be important to you. So, and also get on the National Sustainable Ag Coalition's listservs because they keep updated information on their perception of it too. They're being very careful to look at it from a small farm perspective. Also, our department, our organic program at WSDA has been asked to gather feedback on whether May is too soon for that closing period on the proposals and comments. It's already extended from what it usually would be. It's now May 16th. And if you think you need more time, or you think it should take more time for people to be able to review that thoroughly, you can let Brenda Book at our organic program know. Unfortunately, I didn't break her cards or anything, and she's been asked to respond to FDA about whether the time frame is enough.
I'm curious to hear from school districts about what expectations you do have for growers that you're working with, whether it's food safety protocols or how you're doing invoicing, how you're doing packaging. What are the needs that you must have met to set up a partnership? If somebody's got a product that you're really excited about, what else do you need from them for that relationship to work? So if there's anybody who wants to field that, if you could just walk to the mic in the middle of the room, would be great.
I'm with Wenatchee Schools in Camp Gibson. Been doing farm to school stuff for this our 4th year. We have wanted to make life between school district and farms easy. We wanted to make this an easy transition so farms could sell to us, and so we have had we've put less emphasis on, I want to say we put less emphasis on safety, because that's not true. But we have put less emphasis on pressure on the farm to be certified in some way, shape, or form, and done more along the lines of, let's go to the farm and take a look at how they do things. And for instance, we visited Cloudview Farms, Jim back there, the owner of that, and saw how they grow, pick, process, wash, ship, package, and we see how it comes in the back door. And of course, we wash everything like crazy. So we see the difference between the product that comes from Food Services of America or Cisco or something like that. I mean, the stuff is pretty clean and ready to go. And that's nice. But when you see the quality of the products that come from the farm and it's got a little bit of dirt on it, and you realize, wow, this stuff came out of the ground, that's interesting. It's not plastic or anything like that. The produce is so fantastic that we wanted to make it so, we just didn't want to put farmers in such a small box that they couldn't get to us, So I will eventually nudge towards more documented safety information. Our district is not going to require GAP certification for farms in order to buy from us anytime soon. We are probably, this year I really changed our procurement stuff to match up with what Tricia's been talking about, geographic preferencing and all the bid stuff, because the auditors are crawling around in the district for a good month and a half every year, and I get picked on a lot because I buy a lot of stuff. So we really tightened up our bid stuff this year, and I was going to do some sort of safety survey, but I decided I'd already spent. We do more of an informal piece, and then next year I'm probably going to do some form of simple checklist, like Trish is talking about, where the farm can talk about, what the groundwater and the type of facilities you have for workers and all of those kind of things, just so we have a sense and we have a documentation. It's really not, to me, a matter of, I can't imagine a farm not taking some precautions and things like that, and we're going to wash the produce. Okay, I think produce has come from the ground for a long time, so it shouldn't be that big a deal. It's fairly straightforward. So that's our experience with the safety part of it. Is that?
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you. Can you speak a little bit to your experience this year of focusing on the bidding, and both what grower response to that ask was, and also if there were any particular things certain growers did that made that more efficient for you, strategies, things that growers were able to offer that made you say, oh, this is the way this needs to be done to really make it happen.
Basically what we do is a fresh sheet format, emailed fresh sheet format. It works really well for us. I have 4 managers who operate secondary schools that have full service kitchens, and then we have a central kitchen was one of those schools, and so our central kitchen feeds about 9 locations, and each of the other 3 schools feeds their own population of kids, and they're their own purchasing agent. So they do all the purchasing for their realm. And what I did this year was just sent out an email to farmers, all the farms we've been working with, and anybody who might be interested. And it was just a sheet that said, we're going to be looking at buying local produce, and if you're interested in selling to us, send us your product list. And I don't know if this sounds like I don't care or what, but we are trying to, like I said, I want to keep the doors open, wide open to the farms, because we want to buy carrots, okay? We want to buy carrots, and we want to buy certain things, but what I want to do is buy whatever the farm has that's fresh and great, and we're going to adjust. So we haven't put huge constraints on, we really, I think one of the few things we've said is we want carrots with tops during the beginning. When carrots are coming out of the ground, I want them with the tops on them. Because we had fun with doing that with kids. We used to put them in buckets of ice water, sticking out, or pans of ice, and carrots sticking out, and kids walking around with a carrot in their hand with the greens. They loved it. So fun stuff for kids. But as far as really specific specifications, we kept it really simple to trying to get smaller fruit, because a peach the size of your skull is $1.50 as opposed to one that's this big. And I think farmer can chime in here, but farmers have a hard time marketing small fruit, and school districts are a great place to market small fruit. Half a cup of fruit is not a very large amount, and that's our requirement. So one small apple is a fantastic size, for that meeting that requirement. The fresh sheet format has worked great. So we sent out a fresh sheet. Every farmer, and there's a couple of farms that we work with in the room, respond back with, here's the products that we have. I sent them on format and a bunch of items and items that we have bought in the past or that might be available. They filled in blanks, the price per pound, or the price per unit, and then I just catalog that stuff. I just keep it, and then every week the farmer sends out a fresh sheet. Here's what I got. This is what's coming out of the ground right now, and Gabriella works with Cloudview, and they have a fantastic fresh list. It's colorful. It's got pictures of the produce. They've really evolved their fresh sheet to be very helpful, because we can actually see, this is and they offer tips on how to use it. And anyway, it works really well for us. And then my managers look at their menus, and we write our menus loose. They menu the entree or the center of the plate in a cycle, and leave a little bit of flexibility. And then we're looking for what fruits and vegetables are we going to put in here. Like she'll market, like at the high school, she'll market, she's going to do a roasted vegetable blend. Well, that can be a lot of different things. And so we look at the fresh sheet and we buy according to what looks fun and exciting and new and good, what the kids like. We like to expose kids to new things, so we try to keep our menus flexible to utilize what's coming out of the ground, so we're not putting farmers in that box again. So the fresh sheet concept works really well.
Great, thank you very much.
I'm going to interrupt really quickly, just tell you there are a couple things going around. One is the sign-up sheet. If you want to get more information, I will take those and type them in and I'll send an email offering you to get on our listserv. I'll also provide it to these guys. So if you want to ask some specific question of a specific person, you can make a note on there too, and we can get back to you either way. The other is a Bridging the Gaps papers. If you are a farm, I'd like for those to go to farmers, and I don't think we have quite enough probably for everyone in the room. So if you're not farming and would be needing more information about gaps, you can just pass that on down the line. Thanks, sorry to interrupt.
Acacia, did you have something?
Do you have time for me to mention a school district that I'm working with that has a slightly different approach?
That sounds great.
So I've been working with the Arlington Public Schools, and unfortunately Ed Aylesworth, who's the food service director, was not able to be here, but He has taken a slightly different approach. He's been working with the Farm to School Committee, and they, with the help of Tricia, wrote a formal request for bids that applies a geographic preference that gives a 5% price preference to Washington State grown foods, and 3% price preference for Washington State grown foods, and a 5% preference for food grown within his 3-county area. And he sent this out to all the farms that he could think of, all the farms that I could think of, all the farms that everyone in the committee could think of. And in addition to the request for bids, what he was asking for essentially was a fresh sheet that could be emailed or mailed to him, and also a food safety checklist, which I believe is the Portland food safety checklist. And he received a really dismal response, unfortunately, to this. Only like maybe 2 farms and 1 produce company got back to him with fresh sheets and filled out the food safety checklist. And so my point here is, it can be a little bit daunting probably as a farmer to get an email or a phone call with, hey, could you send us all this information? And I would say if it seems really daunting to you, give that person a call, and they will walk you through it, because they want to buy from you. They would love to get your fresh meats and buy from you.
Right, I absolutely agree. And there is sort of this introduction process to how this works. It's new nationally. This is new all over the place, and we're all working our way through it. And part of our process, all of us in the Fresh Food in Schools project, and the schools that are piloting and trying it, is to get information about how hard is it and does it work? Because I always try to make sure that USDA hears from us if they're putting rules into place that just don't work for farm to school. So we want to hear feedback about which models are working for people. As a farmer, if you want to tell me what was hard about it, that will feed what I tell schools when I talk about it, and these guys too. So it's all about keeping communication open about how this can work better.
I can't see what's coming up behind me. What other questions do we have? We've got about 6 minutes. Yes.
I don't have a question, but I'd love to offer some resources.
Talking to the mic then.
Talking to the mic.
Thank you.
My name is Megan, and I'm here with Food Hub, which is an online resource that helps wholesale food buyers and sellers connect. And we do a lot of work with schools, helping them find farmers directly and work with them. And there's one resource that I wanted to recommend, which is another online resource from familyfarm.org, is the On-Farm Food Safety Guide, and it's free. It walks you through the steps for farmers, but it might also provide a really great resource for schools who are looking to create a checklist of their own, because it's going to be probably closely mirrored to what a farm might also be checking for, as they may or may not go through the SCAP process. And then in terms of creating a fresh sheet, Food Hub is a free resource, and I wanted to talk a tiny bit about it just now, but I'm going to talk more about it before the networking session, which I hope you'll all be able to stay for. But in case you aren't, we do have a hot sheet feature on Food Hub, and as part of a profile, you can create a list of products that are searchable by the entire membership based on either product name, also availability when you have it. And from that product list, you can just create a really simple hot sheet and connect with other schools or other buyers that are on the site. And then there's a message center. It makes it super easy to send that. And then also for schools who are looking to do the multiple bid process, we've been talking with schools and asked, with this, and schools have been asking us, if I'm searching for farmers on Food Hub and sending them a bid, does it count? And I think it does, because it's all about that documentation and just having everything in one place. So I'm in the other room if you want a demo.
In relation to thank you very much. And there are also a couple of projects similar to that, or different kinds of food hubs, like physical food hubs rather than the online food hub. And there are also some online projects in Washington. The 2 that I know of right now are based in Western Washington, as far as where they distribute to. But they do pull from statewide, some of them. So one of them is at the Northwest Agriculture Business Center, and their drop point is in Woodinville. But they are interested in farms from all over the state. And then Viva Farms also has a project going that I don't know very much about yet. So there are looking online for sort of food hubs, Washington, Oregon, Northwest, and then also starting with the food hub and learning about that today. Great. Other resources for GAPs are on our website. I just wanted to show it to you here. agr.wa.gov, you go to inspections and then GAPs and GIPs. And there's on-farm food safety is one of them. We link to a lot of them here on the right, and then we have a Q&A that we're always hoping to build, and it has right here how to put your questions on there. So let us know about that.
So we have time for one or two more questions or comments. Anybody?
Yeah, as well. My question is about farm-based field trips. So if schools want to partner with a farm and the grower is just willing but just doesn't have a, is busy. So are there any examples of how to make that more palatable for the grower as well as the school?
My recommendation, what would perk my ears as a grower, is if you had, even if it was semi-abstracted, a connection to, basically, if you entertain this and spend your time on this and incur this cost, there is going to be a business outcome for you. It's going to ideally result in a sale somewhere. I'm not saying, well, we promise to buy your product if you let the kids on farm, but whether it's talking about, well, all the kids are going to go home and tell their parents that they got to visit a farm today, and maybe we'll even send the kids home with a little placard saying, yeah, we were on Farmer Joe's, and he's at the farmer's market on Saturdays, and at the grocery store downtown in the produce aisle. To be able to connect that so it's an investment with a return. The other thing is finding the producers who are excited about that sort of education and outreach.
I was just going to say, I worked with the Farm to School program in Eugene and Willamette Valley, and I know that it was part of our grant to actually give a fund to the farmers for their time and for that visit, so making it, again,
I've done a bunch of that, and the time I received the $50 honorarium was so awesome. That's the kind of thing that, whether it's your PTO, PTA group, or Rotary or somebody, to say, hey, we want to do, a half a dozen farm trips a season, and we want to pay the farmer $50. That's money that you can come up with somewhere.
And I would second that for trainings, workshops, family events. Try, those of you who are not farmers in the room, not to ask farmers for donation, but to offer to buy the food for that event that highlights their work. Because it is marketing for them, but it's also food that costs them money and will make them money somewhere else. So finding those community sources to add to your budget to be able to pay the farmers for the food for special events. Obviously you're paying for it for the lunches, but for both would be great.
Yes.
In reading through your 1,200 pages right now, are there any new issues that address safety issues for schools that are producing their own food?
It does not have anything specific to that. We recommend, there's a couple of things. There are lots of resources, and I'm going to go to school gardens here on our webpage, and there is a specific practices for food safety page, and at the bottom are a bunch of best practices resources. These are from different sources around the country and from National Farm to School Network about how to grow food in school gardens that meets the good agricultural practices standards without getting GAP. Although I actually think for school farms, for larger scale education programs with horticulture students and ag students, it's a great thing for them to walk through the actual checklist and figure out how their practices would meet a standard. But there are lots of resources here, and we also just did a best safe salad bars guide, which was really what Kent was talking about, to educate schools about how to handle food wherever it comes from, but with a specific farm fresh and school garden angle. It is okay to use it. USDA has said it is okay to use school garden produce and serve it to kids. And here's what you do and what you tell your board you're doing to make sure that it is safe. Because sometimes there are questions from local health departments or boards about serving that food, and that is something we want schools to feel they have the knowledge and the resources and the links to back up their statement that it is safe.
So we're winding down our time.
I just want to say, I'm an intern at the Olympia School District, and I just completed like a protocol for a garden cafeteria program. And I work closely with the health department. You have to work with your local health department. But if you'd like to see that, I can show that to you. I use the DPS as a really good example. But yeah, I just finished that. So we're going to use it district-wide, but we also have a garden cafeteria program specifically at one school.
Thank you. Oh, Jim.
Say one last quick thing. I was afraid Kent was from Wenatchee there. I'm Jim from Cloudview, and I was afraid Kent there in Wenatchee was getting ahead of me on the mutual admiration compliments, and so I wanted to add a little bit. I mean, working with the Wenatchee School District has been wonderful, and as a farmer, it's probably inspired me to reach out and work with others. And I mean, basically what we're working to do here is to connect people with their food, but we're also working to connect people with each other. So these relationships are valuable, and valuing the connection and people working together on this has been great. So I think that's it. Wenatchee's been wonderful to work with, and there's many other good school districts out there. It's about these connections with each other.
Perfect note to end on. Thank you all for your time and attention.